so thank you guys. Thank you so much, Kite. Thank you so much, Nir, for the invitation to be here today. It is such a pleasure and a joy to get to have this opportunity. As I was saying earlier, I am just mega jealous that you guys are, well, that Nir is in Santa Barbara, because frankly, like this is about as close as I'm gonna get to surfing. Pretty much. This is it. As far as I'm concerned. So this is just a huge and just massive privilege. So thank you guys. I hope very much that we can do this in person very soon. So I wanted to do this talk a little bit differently. I want to take us back first of all to TradFi, and see if anyone remembers. I don't know, Kite Nir, if you remember this guy by any chance. Because he is a legend. This is an absolute legend on our screens at this point. Anyone know? Okay, so this is Navinda Sarao. Navinda Sarao in 2010, at that time, he was a 36-year-old guy, a trader, living off his parents' basement in Northwest London. And this guy has been charged and convicted of having undertaken a series of trades that resulted in what was then the single largest points drop in Dow Jones history, when the market crashed over 1,000 points in just a couple of minutes before eventually rebounding, but not before like just causing enormous amounts of chaos and mayhem and just a complete sense of what the frazzle just happened, right? And so, as the dust settled on all of this, oh shizzle, I don't know where this is going. As the dust settled on all of this stuff, the big question was, how could this dude, this 36-year-old guy living in his parents' basement, who in his own biography said that he has no real life skills and no real social life, and I'm not dissing him. This is basically me, to a T, essentially. But how could this guy, with just this, a trading system in a basement, manage to do a series of trades that brought down, let's just check our notes, the freaking U.S. financial system, right? And so, in thinking about that question, and sort of wondering about, that aspect, the blame really quickly fell on the CME, the Chicago Mercantile Exchange, right? The Chicago Mercantile Exchange was where Navinda Sarao was the, super active as a trader. And it turns out that when we look back, that Navinda Sarao was in fact really, really well known to the exchange. But he wasn't well known as a great trader. What he was well known as was as a troll, right? This guy was a troll, right? He was, trading in a way that was highly problematic on multiple instances. The exchange knew about it. The exchange talked to him about it, but the exchange did nothing about the fact that this guy was a risky trader. They never told other traders. They never gave him a warning. They never kicked him off the exchange. Right. And so, the kind of point of that stupid, that stupid analogy, right? It's a dumb analogy, but it's an extreme analogy. But the point of it is simply to highlight one thing that we all need to just appreciate once in a while, which is that today's exchanges, commodities exchanges, the securities exchanges, today's regulated exchanges in the traditional marketplace perform a really frontline role in overseeing this market, in oversight of our market, in providing the kind of frontline supervision of real-time trading in a way that provides some basic stabilizers and surveillance for the marketplace as a whole. That is what our system has actually produced as a key part of the architecture for financial markets. And so the question that I've been kind of working on for a while, the kind of position that I'm super, kind of obsessed with thinking about, is what we do about crypto exchanges as a matter of trying to see whether their specific structure, whether how they are built, the uniqueness of that model in some ways, as well as as well as the fact that they perform this critical role in the crypto market, whether whether crypto markets today, looking forward, should also be co-opted into the regulatory system in order to provide oversight, surveillance, discipline of the market. And so, that is the point of, I think, that the talk I would love to kind of, have with you guys today, which is to kind of talk through some of the implications of that, or think through some of the implications of that. You guys are very busy and deeply enmeshed in the data side, in thinking about like market structure of crypto and different questions in relation to that. And obviously, Kite, you're at Uniswap, which is, super relevant for this. And so, thinking about whether from your perspective, how we bridge the law side, the policy side, to address a key regulatory problem, which is we're not having regulation at this point. Let's try and figure out what we do about that. And, bridge that problem with a policy proposal to say, can we make crypto exchanges work hard in order to protect the market more fully? So that is the kind of point of the talk today. I wanted to kind of, think through this stuff with you. And, I hope that all sounds okay. Does that sound okay? Just tell me
Yeah, it sounds perfect. You have a question in the chat. Do you think if self-regulation is enough?
Great question. So I think, let's talk about that. I don't think personally self-regulation is anywhere close to enough. I think as a matter of just policy, self-regulation is just the beginning, right? And it's just the first step, and it's arguably the step that we can take the quickest in a neat way, but that can at least provide, at least my argument, at least my feeling is, at least provide a front door to enter a space for the crypto market that at least has some standardization and some ability to discipline bad actors in a way that is formal and public and real. And so and driven by kind of peer discipline, which has its payoffs. So self-regulation is by no means the enough, I don't think, but I think it's definitely good for a first step, particularly in the absence of larger public regulation that can help bring some kind of risk management to the market today. But please keep the questions coming. I would love the idea to have just a conversation rather than listening to myself drone on in this pink outfit that I wore for no reason. Okay, so I think I want to scare you guys for 2 minutes, if that's okay, with a little bit of law. And just to give you some legal background as to why exchanges have come to play such a critical role in the marketplace, right? So, it's a really interesting first question that our colleague asked, which is, is self-regulation enough? Well, it turns out that exchanges have been providing self-regulation for a very, very long time, long before we had a system of regulation for the commodities markets or for the securities markets in 1933. Right. So, this has been a very important crux and part of our marketplace from the very beginning, from the buttonwood tree that was a form of self-regulation that New York Stock Exchange brought into place with 24 of these brokers coming together to, create rules for that nascent market. That was the first way to kind of create an order for the marketplace. But today, right, since the 30s, exchanges have been playing just a deeply statutory role in policing the market. So if we take the example of securities exchanges, under the Securities and Exchange Act, Section 6, in order to be licensed, an exchange has to agree to ensure that they're providing oversight of the market, that they are, ensuring that they're writing rules for the market, that they are policing those that are using their market, that they agree to provide a fair and equitable marketplace. Exchanges do this and have done this for absolute decades in our traditional marketplace. And we can see why the law, policy, and markets need this and depend on exchanges to do that. Firstly, I don't need to tell anyone in this room, like you guys are all like deep into this shizzle, right? That exchanges are obviously incredibly informed. And they're informed in a way today that is super powerful from a structural perspective. Right? When we look at the commodities trading or we look at securities trading, right? That stuff is happening in freaking milliseconds and microseconds, right? That is deploying enormous amounts of tech, that is deploying just enormous amounts of like, just quantity of data that is coursing right through these institutions. And these people are at the front lines. They are hoovering up this information on a constant basis that is giving them the ability to create a map, a taxonomy of the risks that are building in this marketplace, that is helping them to be informed and calibrated about the kind of rules they can create to, help with some of that fragility that they are seeing. For example, right, to, circuit breakers, creating circuit breakers was something that exchanges really kind of forwarded after the flash crash in 2010. That was kind of, a big thing that they have been, working on. So these are folks that are super informed, and that information is deeply necessary because it's at the front line, it's data heavy, it goes in milliseconds, freaking microseconds. And just from the standpoint of physics, these people are the first people that are, uniquely able to capture that insight and data. So, information is a huge advantage that these folks have, arguably over public regulators that are at one remove from the action. In addition, obviously, they just have a ton of freaking experience. I mean, they've been doing this for like centuries, Like this is like Lin-Manuel Miranda, like let's make a musical about the New York Stock Exchange type of thing, right? Like, this is freaking old school. These guys have been doing it forever, and that means that, they have some real sense of, of what's moving the animal spirits moving the markets, right? Of the kind of soft dynamics that push the market in certain directions, right? Being able to spot what the trends are in relation to particular kinds of, malfeasance or particular trends in terms of how traders are behaving or the technologies that they're using. So for example, like things like spoofing or, that, is something that exchanges are able to say, look, this is what's happening. This is a kind of trend line of where some of the kind of, risks are emerging from, that spoofing like behavior, using algorithmic trading, order submission strategies as a way to disrupt our workings of the engine or whatever, right? These are folks that just have experience to be able to understand how to fit current dynamics into a larger historical picture and then what to do about it. And so like perhaps the most, badass thing that these guys are able to do, and they are pretty badass in many ways, is that they're just able to kick people off the exchange, right? They are able to, exercise an ability of power that is just able to exclude people from being able to earn their freaking bread, right? And by having that power to deprive traders of their livelihood, or companies that are listing themselves of their ability to raise capital, right? The ability to be able to have that immense economic impact means that they're able to create ex-ante incentives for good behavior before someone even does something bad on the market, right? So the capacity to exercise exclusion in a way that is really economically significant means that people are going to try and behave better before the fact. And there's a bunch of academic studies that speak to that fact, right? That exchange discipline has real power, that the capacity of exchanges to exclude, to send notices, to put on their website that they're going to like come after X, Y, and Z, that the ability for that to happen is something that has resulted in real positive, effects on the person that is being disciplined. So clearly exchange discipline does have power, as shown by, numerous, academic studies that have spoken to this fact. Obviously, it's not perfect, right? Like, as we'll talk about, it's by no means perfect. There's a ton of issues that scholars have raised. Chiefly amongst them is the fact that it's a very conflicted process to rely on exchanges to provide discipline of those that are bringing the exchange business, right? So would an exchange want to discipline one of their major market makers when these market makers are providing so much juice to the freaking exchange, right? So conflicts of interest is certainly something that has been raised, but by and large, this is an accepted important part of our market. Does that all sound okay? This is the scary law part's over.
I think there's another question in
Is
the
there a
chat
question?
that says the barriers of entry is less of a problem in crypto market, or it will be the same.
Yeah, it's an amazing question. It's an amazing question. Sorry, I opened the chat. It's a really important question, and so this is something that I think we'll have to talk through as we go through a discussion, which is today's crypto exchanges are have in some cases very low barriers to entry. You can in certain situations set up a crypto exchange with great code and a website, right? So the ability to actually create that barrier to exchange is something that we have to think about, which is that if you do want to become an exchange, that you have to get some kind of designation from regulators, CFTC, SEC, maybe both of them working together, right? To be able to then exercise some kind of gatekeeping over the marketplace as a whole. Particularly if you are going to be, taking on lots and lots of volume, that you go ahead and you get that designation, or potentially seek out something lesser, like an alternative trading system designation that at least requires you to have some obligations vis-a-vis the market, right? Today, that just doesn't exist. And that obviously, as we'll talk about, skews some of the incentives of these exchanges to provide good behavior and to exercise discipline of the marketplace as a whole, because they have no real incentive, and competition is so fierce that they have even less incentive to provide discipline of the market and chase away the customers that are using their platform. So it's a great question. I think it's one that is we can kind of weave through our conversation today. Obviously, none of us want to talk about TradFi and New York Stock Exchange and NASDAQ, like in CME or whatever. Like that stuff is obviously extremely boring. This is what we want to talk about. Here he is in his anti-Swifty gear. He's sort of like triggering the Gilmore Girls look. Our FTX, Sam Bankman-Fried, obviously this is the guy from Quadriga, put up these two kind of very bad actors in some ways to highlight the point that we're going to talk about crypto, and we're going to talk about crypto at a point where exchanges have really lost so much of their credibility. So the big question I think that we can frame this as is, why would we want to ask exchanges that have produced these two I can't even work this anymore, right? To produce, these two cats, why would we trust that system to provide oversight of the market? And I think that this is exactly why we need to push exchanges to do this, because we don't want these kinds of folks to come up and be a part of the space, and requiring them to go through the self-regulatory process, as we'll sort of discuss, provides one way to kind of avoid some of that, some of those issues. So obviously, we have some major exchanges that have become, I think all of us can agree, some major financial players in the market. When we're looking at, exchange trading volumes as they've come up through this year, this was taken yesterday, screenshot of yesterday's trading volumes, right? So, we've got just huge amounts of financial activity that is coursing through these institutions, right? They are actual legit players. Back in November 2022, Binance was doing something like $1 trillion worth of spot by itself, on a monthly basis. When we look at derivatives trading volumes for Binance and FTX at that time, they were like, just hugely multiplied. I think 12 trillion was one figure that I read in terms of notional, right? So, there's a huge kind of financial footprint that these exchanges have come to occupy, right? And so the question really, is, how do we channel some of that? Can we channel some of that in terms of providing some kind of oversight of the market. So I kind of want to put a bullish case forward to say that some of the specific structural aspects of crypto exchanges make them uniquely advantaged, really well equipped to actually exercise discipline on the market. Like that they actually have some real opportunities for doing this well. I think the first reason why these crypto exchanges, and Kite, it's really interesting that you are at Uniswap, so maybe you can kind of, talk about some of that. One big reason why these folks can provide high quality oversight of the market is because they are arguably some of the best informed players in the crypto space. This is a brand new industry, right? It's like coming up for like 15 whatever years old. The crypto exchange industry, if we look at Mt. Gox or the early years of Coinbase, this is a very young industry. And these are folks that have been at the center of that industry for most of its existence, right? They are folks that are deeply, deeply, deeply informed of the code. Every single time they're going to list a coin, they have to understand the code of that coin. They have to ensure that they are engaging with its blockchain to be able to fully integrate their own trading systems into that, into the blockchain itself. They are having eyes on the, they're having eyes on latest wallet technologies to make sure that folks' assets are being looked after. They are engaging systems, trading systems to generate liquidity in that market. And perhaps most importantly, they're just seeing all these people come through their doors in order to buy and sell crypto or engage with other services engaged in crypto, for example, staking, right? So these are folks that are at the nexus, at the crossroads of so many different crypto activities that they're almost uniquely informationally equipped to get eyes on the market. And I think what's also interesting is that in a world of decentralized action, they are arguably a centralizing focal point that can then be able to get eyes on the coins, the blockchains, the customers that are coming to buy and sell crypto, third-party service providers, such as those offering trading services or wallet services or whatever, that these are folks that are bringing all of these different stakeholders within the crypto market together. So it does mean that they have a unique vantage point from which to assess the safety and soundness of the market as a whole. So in terms of information,
can I ask a question?
yeah.
So I think, given that some of us are more economists and less lawyers, so the way that maybe you can clarify, the way that I think about it is that in a competitive market, when you have a few exchanges, and maybe it's kind of go with align with what you were saying, by structure, exchanges compete between them to attract people to use their platform. The guys that run these companies are educated, have information, and they have self-interest in some sense, is to provide the best service for the customer to want to keep being in the exchange. So you when I think self-regulation, I think each of these kind of exchanges have some incentive to have rules and do self-regulations in terms of being competitive. However, the problem is when we have kind of bad actors that let's say mislead us as the FTX example, because the FTX example is not example of someone. I think it's also there is kind of something about misbehaving, so doing something that not with full transparency, little bit manipulating the users. So it's a, let's say it's a business that working in a competitive market, but in a misbehaved way. So this guy, in some sense, like this example is an example of someone that maybe not reacting as we want the competitive market to react. So maybe what, like, I don't know, maybe you can connect it to
Yeah.
law language and how we can think about it.
I think, Nir, that's a really deep and important point. You know, I think that there is a huge insight that you bring in that respect, which is say, look, there's two competing forces here. And I think it's worthwhile in the cause for optimism to list one, which is that being compliant is a competitive gain for some exchanges. And I think we see that a lot, right? So, you know, particularly today, we see exchanges say we are going to be extraordinarily compliant and high quality. And that's a way to bring business to our firm. So for example, when you look at, when you look at big institutional players like BlackRock, you know, they are like, we are looking for a safe exchange in order to do the crypto business. And so we are going to partner up with a exchange that provides that level of safety, right? So, doing compliance brings its own positive compliance payoffs. The question is, what's the level for crypto exchanges to say that we are willing to defect from some of that high quality compliance in order to also generate business for our market? And at what point is that going to be the case? Right? So in a marketplace, and coming to the earlier question, where there are very low barriers to entry, that incentive to defect is going to be very high in places, or periodically defect, because you can be opportunistic at lower cost. There is no penalty for you to be douchey about providing oversight. There's no penalty. There's no pushback. There's no regulator saying stop doing that. There's no person like we did with Navinda Sarao and the CME that would discipline the CME after that fact. There's no penalty, right? So in that context, you're able to defect at a much lower cost because you don't need the payoff from that defection to be particularly high. You just need some gain, but not enough gain as we would need if CME was being disciplined. They need a payoff greater than the pushback they would get from the regulators. Here, there's no pushback. There's just additional business and potentially some reputational cost, but that threshold is lower. So even though compliance does have, a very positive story, and increasingly we see that post FTX, and everyone's like, we are compliant, high quality systems. Binance is under a monitorship, so everyone's now saying Binance is going to be compliant. So let's look at it from a more positive standpoint for their business. But equally, as we'll get to in just a bit, there's that trade-off is also really, really interesting. That opportunistically, you can be opportunistic even within that, and the threshold at which you have an incentive to do that is lower in a very competitive market. And so it's unsurprising that folks like FTX have happened, right? Or Binance has happened, even that being able to engage in potentially problematic or actually problematic activities doesn't come with a huge amount of blowback until the stuff has actually hit the fan. So
I think you gave a very good example in the economic point of view. So basically, the way that maybe I want to summarize to see if we are on the same page is that markets, in some sense, by nature, need to create kind of a self-incentive to do to behave as we want markets to behave in a good way, and to attract customers. And self-regulation can be done by firms just because they see this like long-term let's say revenue or benefit, but sometimes there is a short-term incentive to defect. And then when there is no regulation of the government, there is no punishment, so people feel free to defect, and in some sense the reason why we want also the public regulation is to kind of try to make people avoid from this defect, because it's not going to be useful. Okay, yeah, I don't know. It's first time I'm thinking about regulation in econ language.
Yeah, that's so. Please come to more law school seminars. I will. You know, that's exactly right, Niran. And you might say you haven't thought about this for the, you know, this is your first time thinking about this, but you're phrasing it like a professor. Frankly, like it's a, you know, a fantastic articulation of exactly that. And you know, in some sense, when we think about the economics of it, I think another factor that is pushing crypto exchanges to do a better job from that economic standpoint is the fact that, weirdly enough, they are some of the most centralized actors within the financial system as a whole. I would argue within traditional as well as crypto financial institutions as a whole, right? Crypto exchanges are so deeply qualified, centralized. And that has come as a function of variety of different market characteristics that we can discuss. But these are institutions that have folded into their structure a multiplicity of functions that are traditionally kept separate in commodities and derivatives, and equities. So, for example, crypto exchanges provide the order matching, they provide the clearing, they provide the settlement, they provide the custody, they might provide other services that are built on that. They are marketing and, you know, and onboarding customers with the smartphone apps and other things like that. Right. So these are institutions that are, you know, connecting with customers directly. That is a change from the traditional derivatives and securities marketplace. They are order matching, they are clearing, they're settling, they are custodying, they are folding all of these different functions into single institutions. And that centralization certainly has issues, but from the perspective of an incentive to be a good regulator, it's a very powerful motivator. Because it means that as much as you are causing risk and disruption in the market, you're also having to internalize all of the consequences of your bad behavior. You are having to eat all of that shizzle yourself. There is not another actor, another third party, some clearinghouse, some custodian that you can offload that risk to. You have to take that on yourself. And we see that in the most egregious and, you know, clear way in the case of FTX, right? Like everything went to hell for FTX, top to bottom, as soon as this thing started to fold, right? So, you know, you are internalizing the fullest consequences. So that should mean that over and above even the CME or New York Stock Exchange or whatever that have buffers in the system, these institutions have none. So arguably there should be some real push, you know, to get good regulation set up in that context. That's at least one argument that I would like to kind of propose from that sense. So I think we have 15, 20 minutes left. So I want to kind of talk about some of the trade-offs here and to think through issues that could also be holding institutions back from providing good oversight of this market. Like, what are some of the drawbacks that we need to overcome in order to make, if we want to make, crypto exchanges good overseers of the market? Now, first and foremost, and again, I love talking to you guys about this because you are working on these issues. But, you know, as much as crypto exchanges are super informed, they're also super struggling with capturing fullest information about the marketplace as a whole. Now, first reasons is that these are all single institutions. They're all super siloed. No one is sharing information here. They're all, you know, information silos in and of themselves. Firstly, a whole bunch of trading is transacting off-chain, right? So, you know, these are institutions that are clearing and settling trades on their books. That information remains in-house. You never see the detailed trades hit the blockchain. Obviously not. All of this stuff is just happening on, you know, within the institution itself. And that's kind of, you know, interesting because in other marketplaces, information gets out, there's a public feed, it gets posted to that feed, it gets shared. None of those mechanisms exist within the context of crypto. And so obviously, like, these are information silos. In addition, they don't always get a whole bunch of information about necessarily the venture whose coin they're sometimes listing. Like there can be a lot of asymmetries in that context, right? Like we don't have systems for disclosure in those situations, right? So even as these are institutions with a lot of informational advantage, the industry as a whole, the market structure as a whole is still beset with a huge amount of information gap that will present people with problems to become like really holistically engaged with the fullest risk of the market. As today, in the case of derivatives or securities exchanges, as they are, they have mechanisms to deal with that. In addition, I think, coming to the point that Nir, you were just kind of getting at, is that these are super conflicted institutions as well, highly conflicted, like massively, in many interesting ways. First and foremost, of course, is the fact that they have huge amounts of commercial relationships with their customers. So, we see crypto exchanges routinely provide lots and lots of services to deliver, commercial products to their customers, whether they be things like credit cards or whether they be things like, different various products and services that are really useful in a competitive market to create stickiness with their customer base. Right? So in a highly competitive market with low barriers to entry, you have to find ways to make your customer yours. And so in that context, offering a whole bunch of tie-ins and services helps achieve that goal in a way. Now, with that said, that also means that there's a high cost of discipline, which is to say that you're going to lose a customer if you exercise discipline. You're going to lose all of that added business that they bring. And then you're also going to send that person to a customer, which means that your competitor is going to get richer as a result. So, in that context, when we look at the universe of crypto trading, that, it's also very conflicted from that standpoint because we have never had guardrails to tell them these are the business relationships you can have, these are the businesses you can't have. And so they've evolved to have these, multiplicity of commercial engagements in a way that is arguably even deeper than in traditional exchanges that also do this, but arguably to a more regulated, in a more regulated capacity. So, there are those conflict issues that we really need to be mindful of. In addition, obviously, the fact of being super centralized, highly centralized, creates its own conflicts. So, you have the marketing, you have the clearing, you have the settlement, everything folded in. That obviously, brings its own sense of like risk within the institution as a whole. That can mean that, for example, when we look at the FTX example, that FTX was able to have a market maker in the exchange that was Alameda, that obviously had a conflict with customer, that with customer interests. To the extent that Alameda wanted to make money for FTX, it had incentives to front run customers, which obviously it did, and that, those internal conflicts are things that are also something to worry about. So, crypto exchanges have advantages, but there are also some serious issues that we need to think about and cure as structural issues before we give them the power to become self-regulatory organizations. And obviously, I think, having Kite here is ultra useful. We haven't even started to talk about DEXs. Right? We haven't even started to talk about decentralized exchanges. How do we handle exchanges like Uniswap, PancakeSwap, whatever, that are such important players in this ecosystem? Post FTX, Kite, you can correct me if I'm wrong, like post FTX, like trading volumes on Uniswap have just exploded, right? Like, one saw almost immediately just this, huge like increase of trading volumes on the Uniswap market. And so you see these folks as very clear players in this market. Question is, how does one integrate them into a self-regulatory system as decentralized organizations that are really driven and underpinned by code? How does one make that code or make the organization or make some kind of structure that can provide some level and delivery of oversight for institutions that are working in this capacity? So that's a puzzle that I think we need to think about. So I'll just, kind of skip over some of this stuff. You know, we all know all the different things that have happened with exchanges that are clearly problematic, FTX hacks, all sorts of crap. But I want to kind of spend a minute on what's at stake here, because I get really angry about this. I get really freaking angry, which is that our regulators haven't done enough or even close to enough to provide protection of the folks that are in the crypto market. And I think it's worth highlighting who they are. You know, this is our traditional RIP, you know, in the equity space, retail space. This is the kind of grandma that everyone kind of brings out to justify regulation. In the crypto market, we also have folks that are really vulnerable. So let me ask you a question. Like, who's the typical crypto customer in America? Like, who has been the typical crypto customer in America? Does anyone, you know, what gender do you think they are?
I'm gonna assume male.
You're probably male, right? So we're gonna say male. What race, you know, demographic do you think they come from? Any guesses?
I actually don't have a good guess on this. I guess for centralized exchanges, they might have a little bit more profiling potential, but I'm actually do not have a good intuition on, for example, the decentralized exchanges.
Yeah, so it's a really cool instinct, Kite. I mean, and age. I mean, this is gonna be an easy one. Age. What age are folks?
I guess it
Young.
depends on like what segmentation of the market we're talking about. Like if I think about like Robinhood's customer versus you know, some second derivative or third derivative of the crypto, you know, product, it's gonna be different, right?
You're so
So
funny. You're such an academic, Kite. Holy shit! I was just gonna have you say young. You're such an academic. I mean, you know, it's it's really interesting because if you look at the American experience in crypto, it skews towards a lot of engagement by communities of color in the States, right? So something like 23% of Black Americans, 19% of Latinx Americans, 25% of LGBTQ plus Americans, right? And it's not that surprising because these are communities that have been excluded historically from engagement with traditional finance. So Kite, you kind of, you know, highlighted that. We've always seen, we've seen traditional finance, you know, do redlining, move away from communities, like have no branches in communities that are low-income communities. LGBTQ plus Americans excluded from certain kinds of private offerings for various reasons, right? So these are communities that have been excluded, so have embraced crypto. And so what one has seen is, and obviously very, you know, these numbers skew much higher the younger we are talking about. So thinking about the under 40s, the numbers are much higher. So these are the people we're talking about. These are the folks that have not had the chance to get the basic protections that are afforded to users of derivatives and securities markets, very basic things. For example, asset custody, right? Ensuring that crypto that is put on the exchange is clearly recognized as being the property of the customer. Now, it's very interesting that everyone today is kind of crowing about the fact that the FTX claim holders are getting back all of their money. They're not getting back all of their money, right? These are folks that are deeply depressed. And why is that? It's because in November 2022, they were, you know, they had the crypto in the exchange. After that, in the bankruptcy process, they were classified as unsecured creditors, meaning that crypto was not their property. According to the law, it was FTX's property. And what that meant was these folks had a bare contractual claim whose valuation was pinned at the level of November 2022 when Bitcoin prices were at 16 or 17,000. So because of that particular legal definition as being unsecured rather than property holders, that they have not been able to capture all the upside that they would have got if that crypto had actually been theirs. So they have missed out on something like 70% growth of their crypto asset since that time. right? And so plus they're not being paid back in the coin, they're being paid back in, you know, in cash, and that is not something that these guys want. So this is a lack of basic protection that just does not happen in derivatives, does not happen in equities or securities. And when it does happen, for example, in the case of MF Global, when Shizzle was mingled, customers were penalized as a result, then the CME had to pay. So we have not achieved that basic level of protection. The people who are losing are real people. And I think, you know, and in some cases from communities that have been burned in past eras of finance, that this is happening again is, you know, a travesty. So I want us to get to a solution. I think that this private oversight is, you know, is one way to try and move forward with a solution. I don't think it's the only one. I just want it to be a first step. And the reason I want it to be a first step too, as a final point, is that I want these guys to take responsibility for themselves. These guys being the crypto exchanges. Come together, put some money on the line, put some legal people on the line, put some expertise on the line, pay for that expertise, you know, develop systems, develop reputational capital based off of engaging private oversight. So let's do that as a way to create some real cost to poor performance that can then change the incentives of defection away from the compliance norm and bring it much more towards increasing compliance in this space. So that's the proposal that I think is trying to create some kind of oversight and grounded in the specific structures of crypto and crypto exchanges.